Another week of college football in the books. Today we're going to be discussing Florida versus Tennessee, what went into overtime, and in many ways, quite a surprising outcome, all things considered, for a number of reasons. I mean, as you know, on this show, I cover Florida pretty extensively. I've done a number of previews, and definitely, to say the least, there were a bunch of surprises in this. I mean, we when we think about Tennessee, for example, they came off the loss versus Arkansas. They're home at Neyland Stadium, and quite frankly, all the momentum should be going for them. They should be coming out with ready for a statement win against the Florida team that has battled a lot of adversity coming into the season so far, and you've heard all the rumors about Billy Napier. And as I was watching this game, I mean, I'll get into the Graham Mertz injury in a second and what that kind of means for Florida football. But to me, one of the biggest things that surprised me as I was watching this game was really how good Florida's defense was. I mean, granted, Nico's been a little, he hasn't really been quite what you would anticipate. I mean, he went 18 for 26 with 169 yards, no touchdowns and an interception. But even for Florida to be in the situation where they were not only pretty much in control of the entire game, but to take them into overtime too. Yes, it's not the result that people want. Yes, Graham Mertz is out. Yes, Montrell Johnson has a little bit of an injury, but I think there are a lot of positives that we can take away from this game. I mean, I think first and foremost, one thing I think Florida definitely deserves some more credit for was, for the most part, they kept the passing game pretty under control. I mean, granted, I do think there are still some obvious issues with the running game, considering that Dylan Sampson, rushed for 100 plus yards, had a touchdown, and for the most part was fairly reliable, particularly in the late stages of the game. But outside of Tennessee's performance, I guess this segment's probably going to be focusing more on the Florida aspect of it. I think the main criticisms that I would have for Florida is really, I think some of the play calling was a little bit questionable. I mean, granted, you never expect your quarterback to be, you know, out of the game with a torn ACL and all that, but I guess I expected I guess I expected more out of Florida, because the thing that fascinated me the most was, you know, there were points in time where it seemed like that, things were moving the way that they should. We were getting some solid plays down the field, really finding the open receivers and doing all that stuff. But the second you get to the red zone, it's like everything that we did for the first 70, 80 yards just goes completely out of the window. And when you look at that, and you say to yourself, after having all these frustrations this year, I mean, you definitely kind of have to wonder. I mean, what's next for this team? I mean, when you have 4 or 5 trips into the red zone, and you manage less than 10 points coming out of there, it's definitely a question mark, and something that is going to be watched all this year. Now, the reports have confirmed that Graham Mertz tore his ACL and his college career is over. And with that said, now we go into the DJ Lagway era of Florida football. They have Kentucky coming next week, which I would say by all accounts is really could be a blessing in disguise in many ways for this Florida program. And I'll explain what I mean by that. When looking at DJ Lagway, I mean, I'll be the first one to say I think the talent there is, you know, it's there. It's you watch enough of his high school film, and he has the raw talent. He has a great arm. He's athletic, and he makes those type of throws where you make those type of throws where you have to go back and watch them. Where if you're the quarterback's coach or the offense coordinator, you can't help yourself, but you can't ignore that type of talent. And going into the season, one of the big debates, especially after the um, ass whooping that Miami gave Florida, was when is it going to be DJ Lagway time? And you know, obviously it is now because, granted, he got injured, but I think what this can spell for Florida in terms of the rest of the season. I would say first and foremost, if you're DJ Lagway, you can look at this from two perspectives. You can look at this from the perspective of, hey, this is really a 6 week showcase for me to show my talents to the entire world. If you do decide, hey, Billy Napier is going to be gone, is if I think that Billy Napier is going to be gone and I don't want to have anything to do with a rebuild, at the worst case scenario, you're looking at yourself, hey, I have an audition for some other power four programs, and maybe I can go in and get a starting job. That's You could look at it that way. Or, what if DJ Lagway is able to handle the pressures of being a true freshman and comes in and just legitimately lights it up? I mean, yes, we saw him versus Samford, and he looked great there, and we've seen bits and pieces of him, as they faced Texas A&M, as we saw versus Tennessee. He went 9 for 17 with 98 yards, a touchdown, and interception. I mean, obviously the interception was not ideal, kind of a silly play in general, but I've talked about this show over and over again in terms of you know young quarterbacks and you know red shirting all the time, that I am always willing to be a little bit more patient with some of the younger players, particularly quarterbacks, especially with Saidi always being sort of a now sort of thing. And now we get a chance to see what he can really do in this type of situation, because in some regard he has all the pressures in the world, but not all the pressure in the world, because there really isn't much expectation for him in the sense of, okay, like, Florida's 3-3 right now, probably the hardest schedule in the entire country. You start off versus Kentucky, who I've said, multiple times on this program, when I covered them versus Georgia, when I covered them versus Ole Miss, that the one thing I'm always going to say about Kentucky, I'm always going to be defending Mark Stoops, because I think he's one of the most underappreciated coaches in the entire country. And the one thing you have to respect about Kentucky is that their defense is solid. They have a really strong defensive line. They're not going to give Lagway those easy dump reads, which I think is a common criticism of Billy Napier, just way too much conservative play calling. But I think this game will be a legitimate test for Lagway in this offense, because we don't know if Montreal Johnson is going to be back in the lineup. You do have Jaden Bowe, who's a solid running back, and has quite frankly been the number two. And I guess if I'm Florida thinking about going to this Kentucky game, I think one of the questions I'm asking myself is, how do you stretch out this Kentucky defense is really one of the things I'm going to be asking myself. And I think secondarily, after the atrocity second half that we saw versus Florida, one of the things I'm asking myself is, how how is Florida going to now really tweak the playbook to get the DJ Lagway strengths? Are we going to are we going to see them being a little bit more aggressive? Are we going to see ways where maybe we're going to see some more designed quarterback runs and really show off that athleticism? Are we going to see some more play actions where he's able to make some throws on the run? I think those are the things from a Florida perspective that I think you really have to be excited about in terms of DJ Lagway. And again, I've said on this show multiple times that Graham Mertz does deserve to be the starter, and he always should be as long as he's healthy. But thinking about it from this Lagway perspective, I do believe ultimately that Florida fans should be excited for a number of reasons. But I think most importantly, although going back to the Tennessee game, although the the matchup wasn't ideal, yes, yes, there were some moments where obviously it didn't come to fruition and everything. But when push comes to shove, I think it goes to show that there is some more, light at the end of the tunnel for this Florida program. Yes, they're going to have some incredibly difficult matchups coming up. Yes, there's still some serious questions with Florida, particularly being able to stop on defense. But over these past couple weeks, you have seen some encouraging signs from Ron Roberts' defense, particularly in the secondary. You have a rushing attack that's kind of starting to come together, and you have, I think, what's going to be a reinvigorated Florida team with a new quarterback under center. You have a coach that really is, quite frankly, has nothing left to lose, and you you have a game next week that is very winnable versus Kentucky.